Hello, my invisible friends. Welcome to Fred's Philosophical 5, a series in which I explain small tidbits of philosophies in 5 minutes or thereabouts. Today's episode is on the Euthyphro dilemma, a very important Socratian work regarding the nature of not just morality, but the nature of what is good, particularly, especially when it comes to God. At its whole, it is a critique of divine command theory. Let's get more into it. Now, the dialogue itself begins with Socrates exiting from the trial. Remember, Socrates ends up being sentenced to death for, quote, corrupting the youth of Athens. Now, he exits his trial, and he meets an acquaintance he knows named Euthyphro. He asks Euthyphro, "Yo, Euthyphro, why are you here today?" And Euthyphro says, "Well, I'm prosecuting my father for murder." Well, Socrates is rather shocked, because at this time, it was extremely taboo for anyone to prosecute their family for murder, least of all their father. So Socrates asks Euthyphro, "Well, why are you doing this? You know, this is extremely pariah in our society." But Euthyphro says, "Well, I know that I am doing the right thing. I am doing what is pious and good." To make a long story short, Socrates basically pushes Euthyphro to define what is pious. Euthyphro is Socrates' interlocutor. What that means is that Socrates will debate with Euthyphro over the nature of whatever philosophical topic they are talking about in the dialogue. Now, basically, Euthyphro only gives examples of what he thinks is pious, but Socrates pushes further, and ultimately, Euthyphro gives the definition of piety as what is commanded by God. Something is good because God said it was. This is, of course, divine command theory. You've probably heard this at some point. God said it was good, so it is good. But Socrates Plato wants to challenge this. Now remember, this is years before any of the main Abrahamic religions of today existed, so he was talking from an ancient Greek perspective. But it is stunning how relevant, even today in the 21st century, his critiques of this are. Now, referring back to the dilemma, we go back to Euthyphro's definition of holiness. Whatever God said. And what Plato splits this into two different horns. Now, the horns are two parts of the dilemma. The first horn is what is wholly good simply because God said so, or did God say it was holy because it already was holy? That sounds a little weird, but let's keep going forward with this. This first horn, think about it. It is holy because God said it was holy. There are many issues with this. First of all, it makes morality totally arbitrary. There is nothing really defining it. I mean, think about it. We have the 10 Commandments, of course, important ones like do not steal, do not murder, do not commit adultery. But if God said tomorrow, you shall steal, you shall rape, you shall murder, does that make it right? No. Does it? Or does it not? Some people would not like to say that it does. But if you go down this philosophical path, this is ultimately what it does. Also it doesn't really define what is holy. It doesn't really provide a measure by which we can decide what is holy. Ultimately, it is just holy because God said it so, but there's nothing intrinsic about it that makes it holy. Murder is not holy, but tomorrow it could be holy, just because of the whims of some god. This is a really not good for God. It makes God just look like some sort of angry dictator. If morality is totally arbitrary, I don't necessarily want to follow a God who tomorrow could just say that murder is okay. And C.S. Lewis himself, in his reflections on the Psalms, explicitly said that it would be better to be an atheist than to follow this sort of arbitrary, dictatorial God morality. But that's the first horn. This is a dilemma, and we have a second one. The second horn. God says it's holy because it already was holy. I.e., God chose it because he saw it was holy. Well, once again, those more perspicacious among you may see the issues. Even though it does solve some of the important issues of the first horn, it makes morality less arbitrary, at least from God's perspective, Once again, it does not really provide a definition for what is holy, and more damning, it makes God more of a puppet. If God chooses something because it is moral, then it is clear that God is separate from morality. Morality is something bigger than God. And even if we were to assume that, okay, maybe there's another supreme being above God, maybe God is just a middle manager, well, the issue is, how did the supreme being decide that said thing was moral? Okay, God chooses do not murder because that is good. Well, the supreme being decided that it was good. But how did the supreme being decide that it was good? Once again, it just becomes an infinite regress of Euthyphro dilemmas as, okay, maybe there's a being above the supreme being that decided it was good. And ultimately, if we're going to portray God as an omnipotent being, if there's something as enormous as morality separate from him, then he's not really all that powerful, is he? If he has to ask someone for help doing his homework on morality, then he's really not that impressive of a god, I'd say. And anyway, if we could just get morality from someone or something else, why do we even need God? Let's just get it from them. Now, this philosophy is very important, and it has been, especially in Christian apologism. Any good Christian apologist worth his salt should at least be aware of this. Now, there have been a lot of critiques of it, levied especially from men like Thomas Aquinas or Islamic philosophers, basically talking about, actually, this is a false dilemma. I come from a Christian background and I go to church regularly, and it's important if you want to, convince others and maintain your faith, to recognize that maybe there are other philosophical definitions of morality that don't revolve around God. And this is ultimately, stemming from this, we get moral theories such as Kant's categorical imperative, which aims to create a theory of morality in which there is no need for a God. Ultimately, reason can be the ultimate arbiter of objective morality. But of course, this dialogue has also been utilized by I say atheist philosophers, but many philosophers who have argued that, well, we can have a morality separate from God, or we can even have a morality that's not even objective, that morality is purely subjective. But anyway, regardless of who you are, whether you are a Christian or the staunchest atheist, this is worth a read. The Euthyphro is a very interesting dialogue, and it only takes about an hour and a half to read. And I think if you're willing to stay skeptical and have an open mind, I think Plato could have a lot to say, and he could teach you a lot. So long, my invisible friends, and make sure to stay skeptical.